Did you ever wonder if medieval queens truly faced dangers beyond royal etiquette and political marriages? Were their lives truly on the line every single day between the years of 500 and 1500? Get ready to uncover the chilling, almost unbelievable stories of 10 times powerful women of the medieval era stared death right in the face and against all odds walked away. Number 10. The Serpent in the Sanctuary. The year is 1345. Queen Joanna I of Naples, a ruler whose very existence was a tempest of political intrigue and personal tragedy, found herself navigating a court more treacherous than any battlefield. Naples, a glittering jewel in the south, was also a viper's nest filled with ambitious cousins, disgruntled barons, and echoes of recent bloody events. Joanna, still in her youth, but already hardened by the murder of her husband, Andrew of Hungary, understood that loyalty was a fickle thing, easily swayed by gold or ambition. Her enemies were many, their motives varied, but their ultimate goal was often the same: to remove the strong-willed queen from her throne. One particularly balmy evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Bay of Naples in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, the queen was observing her customary evening prayers in her private chapel within Castel Nuovo. The chapel was a place of solace, for Joanna a sanctuary of quiet contemplation amidst the clamor of court life. It was a small, ornate space, scented with incense and lit by the soft glow of flickering candles, where the queen would often spend an hour or more alone with her thoughts and her devotion. On this specific night, a trusted lady-in-waiting, a woman named Isabella, had prepared the chapel. Isabella had served the queen for years, her quiet demeanor and unwavering loyalty seeming beyond question. Or so it had seemed. The plot was simple in its malevolence. A local Neapolitan viper, known for its potent venom and aggressive disposition, had been captured days before and kept in a cool, dark place. Isabella, acting on the instructions of a disgruntled faction of nobles, who believed Joanna was too lenient with her late husband's murderers, was tasked with introducing the deadly creature into the chapel. Shortly before the queen's arrival, plan was to release the snake near the queen's kneeling cushion, hoping that in the dimly lit chapel, startled by the unexpected presence, it would strike a swift, silent, and seemingly accidental death, attributed to nature's caprice rather than a deliberate act of regicide. Who would suspect the humble viper? As Joanna entered the chapel, her silken robes rustling softly, the air was still and warm. The scent of frankincense was heavy. She knelt before the altar, her head bowed in prayer, her guards stationed discreetly outside the chapel doors. Isabella, feigning to adjust a drapery near the altar, released the viper from a small concealed leather pouch. The snake, disoriented by the sudden light and warmth, initially coiled. It was a dark, slender creature, almost invisible against the shadowed stone floor. However, fate, or perhaps a guardian angel, intervened. As Joanna began her silent prayers, a small, highly decorated prayer book, a gift from her late grandmother, slipped from her grasp. It was a heavy tome, bound in rich leather, and it fell with a muffled thud onto the stone floor directly beside her kneeling cushion. The unexpected noise, amplified in the quiet chapel, startled the coiled viper. Instead of striking at the queen, the snake reacted defensively, lashing out at the nearest perceived threat, the falling book. Its fangs, meant for the queen's ankle, instead embedded themselves in the thick leather cover of the sacred text. A gasp escaped Isabella's lips, not of horror, but of sheer, unadulterated shock and frustration. Queen, momentarily distracted by her dropped book, looked down to retrieve it. As her hand reached for the book, her eyes caught a flicker of movement. There, coiled tightly, its head raised defensively, near the book was the viper, its forked tongue darting in and out. Joanna's reaction was instantaneous, not one of screaming panic, but of sharp, regal alarm. She recoiled swiftly, her hand instinctively reaching for the small dagger she often kept concealed in her belt. For personal security, a habit born of her dangerous reign. Her sharp cry, a single piercing sound, instantly brought her guards rushing into the chapel. They found the queen standing rigidly, pointing a steady finger at the coiled snake. The guards, quick to action, dispatched the creature with a single brutal blow from a halberd. The danger had passed, but the queen's sharp eyes, even in the flickering candlelight, had not missed the pale, trembling face of Isabella, who stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror and a desperate kind of regret. Isabella's hands were shaking uncontrollably, and her gaze, when it met the queen's, was filled with a desperate, unspoken confession. The queen, ever shrewd, immediately understood. The viper had not simply appeared, it had been placed. Isabella, under intense questioning, soon confessed, implicating the disgruntled noble faction. Joanna I, though shaken, had survived yet another deadly conspiracy, her life saved by the unexpected fall of a prayer book. Her reign, however, would continue to be a perilous tightrope walk over an abyss of betrayal and violence. Number 9. The poisoned Pem of Paris. In the heart of the 13th century, Paris was a city of soaring cathedrals, bustling markets, and intellectual ferment. But beneath its grand facade, political currents flowed swiftly and dangerously. Queen Blanche of Castile, a woman of formidable intellect and iron will, ruled as regent for her young son, King Louis IX. Her position was unenviable. She was a foreign queen, often viewed with suspicion by the powerful French barons who bristled under her strict governance, and who openly resented her authority. The barons, a confederation of powerful lords, saw her regency as an opportunity to weaken the crown and reclaim lost influence. They formed alliances, openly defied her edicts, and plotted ceaselessly. Blanche, however, was no shrinking violet. She rode at the head of her armies, negotiated with shrewdness, and governed with a firm hand that earned her both respect and fear. Her unwavering devotion to her son's future and the stability of France was her guiding principle, but it made her a prime target. The specific plot, hatched in the shadows of a Parisian tavern in the spring of 1230, aimed not for a dramatic, bloody confrontation, but for a slow, insidious decline. The orchestrators were a cabal of frustrated nobles, led by Hugh X of Lusignan, who had openly rebelled against Blanche before. They understood the queen's habits, her tireless work ethic, her meticulous attention to state documents, and her preference for working late into the night, often alone in her private study, within the Louvre Palace. Their plan involved a subtle and insidious poison, derived from a rare plant brought back from the Crusades. This particular toxin, when absorbed through the skin, caused a gradual weakening of the body, fatigue, confusion, and eventually organ failure. Mimicking a natural lingering illness, it would leave no obvious trace, making a diagnosis of assassination nearly impossible. The chosen delivery method was ingenious in its simplicity. A specially prepared quill, the very instrument of Blanche's power and diligence, a disgruntled scribe, a man named Henri, known for his beautiful calligraphy, but also for his gambling debts, was bribed. He was tasked with replacing one of the queen's favorite writing quills, a large, elegant goose feather she had used for years, with an identical one whose shaft had been subtly treated. The hollow end of the quill, where the quill was held between the fingers, was treated with the potent, odorless poison. The intention was that over days and weeks of sustained contact, as the queen held the quill for hours upon hours, drafting decrees and letters, the poison would slowly seep into her skin, condemning her to an invisible death. On the appointed night, Henry, his heart pounding like a drum, managed to gain access to the queen's study under the pretext of delivering urgent dispatches. He skillfully exchanged the quills, placing the poisoned one in its usual silver holder on the queen's desk. He then retreated, his hands trembling, convinced he had sealed the queen's fate. Later that evening, Blanche, having spent the day addressing endless petitions and receiving ambassadors, retired to her study. She lit the beeswax candles, their soft glow illuminating the stacks of parchments awaiting her attention. She picked up her familiar quill, dipped it in ink, and began to write. The scratching sound of the feather on parchment filled the silent room. However, As she began to draft a particularly complex treaty with the Count of Brittany, Blanche noticed something amiss. The quill felt different. It was subtly heavier, the balance slightly off. She paused, tapping the quill thoughtfully against her chin. It was a minor detail, perhaps, but Blanche was a woman who noticed everything. She prided herself on her attention to detail, on her ability to discern the slightest deviation from the norm. It was a trait that had saved her more than once. She examined the quill more closely in the candlelight, turning it over in her fingers. She noticed a faint, almost imperceptible sheen on the lower part of the shaft, a slight discoloration that wasn't present on her usual well-worn quill into too new, despite tarry. And replacements in her closely guarded study were never accidental. Without a word, Blanche placed the quill carefully on an untouched section of her desk, away from her other documents. She then summoned her trusted chamberlain, a grim-faced nobleman named Sir Gautier. Her voice, though low, carried an undeniable note of urgency. She pointed to the quill. "Sir Gautier, send this to the royal physicians immediately. Have them examine it with the utmost scrutiny, and find the scribe who delivered the dispatches this evening. Bring him to me with haste." The physicians, highly skilled and accustomed to royal suspicions, meticulously examined the quill. Under their careful scrutiny, using early forms of chemical testing and keen observation, they quickly detected the faint traces of the insidious poison. The news was delivered to Blanche, confirming her dreadful suspicion. The scribe Henri was apprehended, and under interrogation quickly confessed the full extent of the plot and the names of the noble conspirators. The revelation sent shockwaves through the court. Blanche, though inwardly seething with rage, remained outwardly composed. She had narrowly escaped a slow, agonizing death, her life saved by an instinctive awareness of a slight irregularity, a minute detail others would have overlooked. The implicated nobles were swiftly dealt with, their rebellions quashed, their influence diminished. Blanche of Castile continued her unwavering regency, her resolve only strengthened by this chilling reminder of the ever-present dangers lurking beneath the surface of power. France would continue to be shaped by her formidable hand, a testament to her keen mind and enduring survival. Number 8. The treacherous path of the Empress. In the turbulent 12th century, the Holy Roman Empire was a land of shifting alliances and brutal power struggles. Empress Agnes of Poitou, a woman of deep piety and strong will, found herself at the epicenter of this storm. As regent for her young son Henry IV, after the death of her husband, Emperor Henry III, she faced her realm simmering with discontent. The powerful German princes, jealous of imperial authority and eager to assert their own autonomy, viewed her regency as an opportunity to seize power and territory. Agnes, despite her personal reluctance for direct political engagement, was forced to navigate a treacherous landscape of betrayal, rebellion, and open warfare. Her greatest rivals were the archbishops and powerful dukes, who openly challenged her authority and even kidnapped her young son in the infamous coup of Kaiserswerth. Though Henry IV was eventually recovered, the incident left a deep scar and a constant threat hanging over Agnes's remaining years as regent. It was during this period of intense vulnerability, when her authority was questioned and her life was constantly under threat, that a particularly audacious plot against her was conceived. The specific attempt occurred in the autumn of 1066, a time of significant political upheaval across Europe, though the Norman conquest in England would overshadow this quieter yet no less dangerous drama in the empire. Agnes was traveling from Speyer to Mainz, a journey necessitated by an urgent dispute between two warring magnates that required her personal intervention. Her route would take her through dense forests and over treacherous mountain passes. Remote areas where imperial authority was often tenuous and banditry was a constant risk. A powerful consortium of disgruntled dukes, led by the ambitious Archbishop Otto II of Cologne and Duke Otto of Nordheim, saw this journey as their chance. They intended to eliminate Agnes, not with a direct assassination, but through a carefully orchestrated accident that would leave no obvious evidence of foul play. Their plan was to rig a specific section of a mountain pass known for its narrowness and steep drop-offs, to collapse as the Empress's carriage passed over it. The outcome would be a catastrophic plunge, seemingly caused by the unstable terrain burying the Empress and her retinue beneath tons of rock and earth. Their agents, skilled engineers and miners, disguised as local peasants, had been working for weeks in the remote pass. They had systematically weakened a crucial section of the roadbed directly above a sheer cliff face, using pickaxes and levers to loosen rock and earth, carefully concealing their work with brush and loose stones. They had prepared a trigger mechanism, a series of ropes and wedges designed to release the unstable section of the road at the precise moment the Imperial convoy was directly upon it. On the day of the journey, a heavy, unseasonable rain began to fall. The mountain roads, already perilous, became slick with mud and loosened stones. Agnes, seated in her heavy, ornate carriage, was accompanied by a small retinue of guards and loyal retainers. As her convoy approached the designated section of the pass, the rain intensified, turning the earth into a muddy torrent. The air grew thick with a cold mist, reducing visibility to mere feet. One of Agnes's outriders, a veteran knight named Sir Lothar, who had served her family for decades, was riding ahead to scout the path. He possessed an uncanny sense for the land and an acute awareness of subtle changes in the environment. As he neared the targeted section, his horse, a sure-footed mountain breed, suddenly whinnied loudly and reared up, refusing to proceed. Lothar, a seasoned horseman, struggled to control the agitated animal. He urged it forward, but the horse stubbornly resisted, pawing at the ground, its nostrils flaring. Lothar, perplexed by his horse's unusual behavior, dismounted and cautiously approached the section of the road on foot. The rain-slicked earth seemed normal enough, but something felt wrong. The ground felt unnaturally soft beneath his heavy boots, almost hollow. And then he noticed it, a faint, peculiar shift in the sound of the rain. It wasn't just drumming on the leaves, there was a deeper resonant rumble coming from beneath the surface, a sound he instinctively knew was wrong for stable earth. The air, despite the rain, also carried a faint, almost imperceptible scent of freshly disturbed earth, not quite covered by the wet leaves. A flicker of light, caught by the rain-slicked rock, also drew his eye, a glint of metal that shouldn't have been there, partially hidden by a clump of ferns. He pushed aside the ferns and discovered a thin, almost invisible rope stretched taut and leading off into the dense undergrowth. His heart sank. This was no natural collapse. Realizing the immediate dire threat, Lothar sprinted back towards the approaching Imperial carriage, yelling warnings at the top of his lungs, his voice barely audible above the howling wind and relentless rain. "Stop! Stop the carriage! The road is compromised!" His frantic shouts and the unusual behavior of his horse caught the attention of the lead guards. The Imperial convoy, though confused, halted just meters from the rigged section of the pass. Moments later, just as the last of Agnes's personal guard had pulled back, the mountain pass gave a groan. Carefully weakened section of road, saturated by the relentless rain, gave way with a thunderous roar. Tons of earth, rock, and loosened timber cascaded down the cliff, face plummeting into the ravine below with a deafening crash, leaving a gaping chasm where the road had been. Agnes, peering out of her carriage window, watched in stunned silence as the very path they had been about to traverse vanished into the abyss. Had it not been for Sir Lothar's keen instincts and the inexplicable alarm of his horse, the Empress and her entire retinue would have been swallowed by the collapsing mountain. The discovery of the concealed rope and the extent of the engineered collapse quickly revealed the deliberate nature of the incident. Though no direct perpetrators were caught at the scene, the pattern of previous rebellions and the identities of those who stood to gain from Agnes's demise left little doubt as to the mastermind. Empress Agnes, though shaken, had once again defied her enemies, her life saved by the intuition of a loyal knight and the warning of a perceptive horse. Her journey through the treacherous political landscape of the Holy Roman Empire continued a testament to her resilience and the watchful eyes of her devoted retainers. Number 7. The Banquet of Betrayal. The year is 1141, and England is tearing itself apart. The anarchy, a brutal civil war, rages between Empress Matilda, claimant to the English throne, and her cousin, King Stephen. Matilda, daughter of Henry I, was a woman of fierce determination, unyielding in her pursuit of her birthright. She had endured exile, constant warfare, and the betrayal of former allies. Though she had at one point held London and been proclaimed Lady of the English, her hold on power was precarious, and her life was in constant peril. Every castle she held was a fortress under siege, every journey an ambush waiting to happen. One of her most relentless and cunning adversaries was Stephen's queen, Matilda of Boulogne, who, despite her less prominent historical role, was a formidable strategist in her own right, tirelessly working to undermine the Empress. But other factions, independent of Stephen's direct command, also saw the Empress as an obstacle to their own ambitions, or simply as a dangerous destabilizing force. A specific plot against Empress Matilda unfolded during a fragile period of truce, or rather a temporary lull in major hostilities. In the late summer of 1141, Matilda, having recently escaped a perilous siege at Oxford, had retreated to the comparative safety of Devizes Castle in Wiltshire, a stronghold loyal to her cause. Her supporters, however, were scattered and often unreliable. It was at Devizes that a plan to eliminate her, not through open combat but through treachery, was set in motion. Plot was hatched by a disgruntled baron, Earl Robert of Gloucester's distant cousin, Sir Humphrey de Lacy, who secretly harbored loyalties to King Stephen but had outwardly sworn allegiance to Matilda. He had cultivated a reputation as a shrewd but ultimately loyal supporter, having provided aid during Matilda's recent escape. This feigned loyalty gave him unprecedented access to the Empress and her inner circle. His goal was to secure her removal through an internal act, preventing external blame. The method was poison, delivered during a grand banquet. A common form of medieval hospitality, but also a well-known opportunity for assassination. Target was to be a specific prized dish, a roasted pheasant stuffed with herbs and fruits known to be a particular favorite of the Empress. The poison, a colorless and odorless extract from hemlock, would be administered to the pheasant after it had been carved and portioned, just before it was served to Matilda. This ensured that no one else would accidentally consume the deadly substance. On the night of the banquet, the great hall of Devizes Castle was ablaze with torchlight, and the sounds of revelry, a deceptive facade of peace in a war-torn land. Matilda, though weary from constant struggle, presided over the feast with her usual regal bearing, engaging in conversations with her remaining loyalists. Sir Humphrey, cloaked in his deceptive loyalty, oversaw the serving arrangements, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He had bribed a scullion, a desperate young man named Thomas, to carry out the final act of administering the poison. Thomas, terrified but desperate, for the promised gold was to pour a small vial of the hemlock onto the Empress's portion of the pheasant, just as it was being placed before her. The roast pheasant was brought to the high table, its aroma filling the hall. Thomas, his hand trembling, approached the Empress's place, the tiny vial concealed in his palm. He lifted the platter, his gaze fixed on the carved portion meant for Matilda. As he leaned forward, about to execute his deadly task, fate intervened in the most unexpected way. Suddenly, a loud, booming voice shattered the festive atmosphere. It was a boisterous knight, Sir Reginald Fitzurse, known for his crude manners and an even cruder sense of humor. Sir Reginald, having already consumed too much ale, stumbled clumsily towards the high table. In a fit of drunken bravado, he reached out to snatch a piece of bread from the platter held by Thomas, jostling the scullion violently. The unexpected jolt caused Thomas to drop the vial of hemlock. It clattered to the stone floor, narrowly missing the Empress's foot and its contents. A small quantity of clear liquid splashed harmlessly onto the rushes. The sudden commotion drew all eyes to the scullion. Matilda, her eyes sharp, noticed Thomas's ashen face, his trembling hands, and the shattered vial on the floor. Her gaze flickered between the scullion and the suspiciously empty vial. The pheasant, untouched by the spilled poison, sat on the platter. Her instincts, owned by years of surviving plots and betrayals, immediately screamed danger. The drunken knight, oblivious to the near catastrophe he had averted, roared with laughter at his own clumsiness. But Thomas, his face pale with terror, knew his cover was blown. He dropped the platter and attempted to flee, but he was quickly apprehended by the royal guards. Sir Humphrey, seeing his meticulously planned plot unraveling, feigned confusion, attempting to distance himself from the panicked scullion. Under intense interrogation, Thomas quickly confessed, revealing the entire plot and implicating Sir Humphrey de Lacy. Sir Humphrey, faced with the evidence, was stripped of his titles and imprisoned. The Empress, though deeply shaken by the proximity of her brush with death, displayed remarkable composure. Her life had been saved by the untimely clumsiness of a drunken knight, and the fortuitous drop of a small vial. The attempt reinforced her understanding that danger lurked not just on the battlefield, but within the very walls of her strongholds, among those who outwardly swore fealty. Empress Matilda, though she would never fully secure the English throne, continued her fight, her survival a testament to her keen observation and the unpredictable quirks of fate that so often determine the course of history. Number 6. The unraveling of the fabric. In the often brutal world of Merovingian Gaul, in the 6th century, queens were not mere ornaments. They were formidable, often ruthless players in a game of thrones marked by astonishing violence and incessant feuds. Fredegund, Queen of Neustria, was perhaps the most infamous of these. Her name is synonymous with intrigue, murder, and an unquenchable thirst for power. The long-running bloody feud between Fredegund and her sister-in-law Brunhilda of Austrasia is one of the darkest sagas of the early medieval period, claiming countless lives, including kings and their children. Fredegund herself was implicated in the murders of her husband, King Chilperic I, his previous wife, and several of their sons. To say she had enemies would be a vast understatement. One particular plot against Fredegund, orchestrated by a faction loyal to her rival, Brunhilda, and desperate to end the constant bloodshed by removing its primary instigator, unfolded in the winter of 584. Fredegund, despite her power, lived in constant fear of assassination. She moved frequently between royal villas. Her guards were doubled, and her food was always tasted by others first. But her enemies were cunning, and they knew her habits. Target was her personal wardrobe, specifically an ornate jewel-encrusted cloak she frequently wore to public events and formal gatherings. The plotters, a group of Austrasian noblemen and their hired agents, knew Fredegund was extremely particular about her attire, valuing rich fabrics and intricate designs. Their plan was to introduce a deadly poison to an object she would regularly wear and touch, a slow and agonizing method of assassination that would allow them to escape immediate suspicion. Poison chosen was a powerful dermatoxin designed to be absorbed through the skin, causing severe illness, fever, and eventually a slow, painful death through internal organ damage, mimicking a virulent fever or lingering consumption. It would leave no obvious external marks until the very final stages. The method of delivery was chillingly precise. A specially prepared silk thread woven with the potent toxin was to be carefully stitched into the inner lining of her favorite ceremonial cloak, around the collar and cuffs, areas that would come into constant, prolonged contact with her skin. The plotters managed to bribe a disgruntled royal seamstress, a young woman named Ilara, whose family had suffered at Fredegund's cruel hands, to carry out the act. Ilara, driven by a desire for vengeance, had smuggled the poisoned thread into the royal workshops. On a cold gray morning, Ilara, her hands trembling, managed to isolate the cloak during a routine mending session. She carefully unstitched a section of the lining and meticulously sewed in the poisoned thread, her heart pounding with every stitch. She then restitched the lining perfectly, leaving no trace of her deadly work. She then returned the cloak to the royal wardrobe, believing she had sealed the queen's fate. Days passed. Fredegund wore the cloak during a solemn church service, and later during a council meeting with her advisors. The poison slowly, subtly began its work. Fredegund began to feel a persistent fatigue, a slight fever that came and went, and an unexplained itchiness around her neck and wrists. Her physicians, consulted multiple times, were puzzled, attributing it to a lingering cold or perhaps an allergy to a new perfume. However, Fredegund, despite her ruthlessness, was also acutely aware of her own body and incredibly suspicious. She had survived too many attempts on her life to dismiss even minor ailments. One evening, after a particularly uncomfortable day, as she changed out of the ceremonial cloak, she idly ran her hand along the inner lining near the collar. Her fingers brushed against a tiny, almost imperceptible prickle. It was a single stray thread, barely visible, that had come slightly loose from the stitching. It was unlike the smooth, luxurious silk of the rest of the lining. Her eyes narrowed. Fredegund's mind raced. Why would a single thread, coarse and rough, be present in such a finely crafted garment, especially one she wore so often? A suspicion cold and chilling crept into her mind. She immediately summoned her chief chamberlain, a man named Ludist, known for his loyalty and his capacity for ruthlessness. Her voice was low but edged with steel. "This cloak," she said, handing it to him. Take it to the oldest laundress in the city, the one who cleans my personal linens. Tell her to examine it with the utmost care, to feel every stitch, every fiber. Tell her to report anything, however small, that feels." The old laundress, a woman named Agnes, had a reputation for her meticulousness and her sharp eyes. She took the cloak and, as instructed, began to meticulously examine it. Her experienced fingers quickly found the subtly foreign thread woven into the lining. It felt stiff, almost brittle, unlike silk. She tugged at it, and a small, almost imperceptible residue came off on her fingers. She then noticed a slight, almost invisible discoloration on the fabric directly beneath, where the thread had been. A lifetime of handling royal garments had given her an instinct for such things. Agnes, alarmed, reported her findings immediately to Ludist. Further investigation, using early forms of chemical analysis known to physicians of the time, confirmed the presence of a potent poison within the thread. The seamstress, Alara, was swiftly apprehended. Under duress, she confessed to the plot, revealing the Austrasian nobleman who had orchestrated it. Fredegund, a survivor of countless conspiracies, had once again escaped death, saved by her own hypervigilance and the unexpected snag of a single poisoned thread. The incident served as a chilling reminder of the constant unseen dangers that lurked in the shadows of her court. The feud with Brunhilda would continue for many more brutal years, but Fredegund, thanks to her keen senses, would live to fight and plot another day. Number 5. The silent arrow of the outlaw. The early 11th century in England was a period of shifting loyalties and contested thrones, a time ripe for intrigue and betrayal. Queen Emma of Normandy, a woman of extraordinary political acumen and resilience, navigated this treacherous landscape with remarkable skill. She was queen consort to 2 English kings, Aethelred the Unready and Canute the Great, and mother to 2 more, Harthacnut and Edward the Confessor. Her life was a testament to her ability to adapt, survive, and even thrive amidst repeated power struggles, Danish invasions, and succession crises. Her influence was immense, but so were the dangers she faced. One particular threat emerged during the chaotic interregnum following the death of Canute the Great. In 1035, when the succession was fiercely contested between Canute's sons and Emma's own children, Emma, a staunch defender of her children's claims, particularly Harthacnut's, found herself at odds with powerful factions, including those who favored Harold Harefoot, Canute's illegitimate son. Some of these factions believed that removing Emma, the linchpin of the opposition, would simplify the succession and solidify their chosen candidate's claim. The plot, conceived in the spring of 1036, aimed to eliminate Emma during one of her frequent, albeit heavily guarded journeys between her strongholds in Winchester and London. Her enemies, a group of powerful thanes, aligned with Harold Harefoot, understood that a direct assault on her heavily fortified residence was too risky. Instead, they sought to orchestrate a seemingly random act of violence, a bandit attack that would conveniently result in the Queen's demise. Their chosen method was a well-placed arrow from an expert marksman. An outlaw archer named Goron. Renowned for his stealth and precision, Goron was promised a vast sum of silver and safe passage out of England if he successfully struck the Queen during her journey. The plan was to position him in a dense patch of woodland along a specific isolated stretch of the Roman road leading north from Winchester, a place where the Queen's carriage would necessarily slow down. Due to the uneven terrain, the arrow, tipped with a fast-acting poison, was meant to penetrate the carriage and strike Emma, killing her swiftly and silently, leaving no immediate trail back to the orchestrators. On the day of the journey, the weather was clear but cold. Emma's convoy was impressive, a testament to her status and the perceived dangers of travel. A vanguard of mounted knights, her heavily reinforced carriage in the middle, and a strong rear guard. Emma sat within her carriage, poring over documents, discussing strategies with her trusted advisors. Goron, the outlaw archer, had meticulously chosen his position. He was perched high in the branches of an ancient oak, expertly concealed by thick foliage, his longbow drawn and ready. He had a clear line of sight to the Queen's carriage as it rumbled slowly along the uneven road. His heart hammered in his chest. This was the biggest bounty he had ever undertaken. He waited, his finger on the bowstring, for the precise moment. As the carriage drew level with his position, Goron released the arrow. It flew silently, a blur of feathers and wood, a perfectly aimed shot intended to pierce the carriage window and strike the Queen. However, at that exact instant, fate, or perhaps a mischievous gust of wind, intervened. One of Emma's personal guards, a young, somewhat inexperienced knight named Edwig, had been riding directly beside the carriage, feeling particularly vigilant that day. He had been nervously fidgeting with the buckle of his saddle, a habit he had developed under stress. As his hand moved, his arm instinctively rose, and his armored gauntlet, worn and scuffed, happened to catch the arrow mid-flight. The arrow, though powerful, deflected slightly off the metal, its poison tip glancing off the carriage window with a sharp, distinct thwack, rather than shattering the glass. The unexpected sound immediately alerted the Queen and her advisors within the carriage. The guards outside, hearing the sudden impact, instantly reacted. Their eyes scanned the surrounding woods. Goron, realizing his shot had failed, quickly descended from the tree and attempted to escape through the dense undergrowth, but the Imperial Guard was too swift. A small detachment of knights having spotted a flicker of movement, Goron, though an agile woodsman, was eventually cornered and captured. After a short, brutal struggle, the poisoned arrow lodged in the frame of the carriage window was quickly retrieved and examined. The presence of the deadly substance was confirmed by the royal physicians. Emma, though unnerved, remained remarkably composed. She had narrowly escaped a silent and deadly fate, her life saved by the unexpected, almost accidental deflection of a guard's gauntlet. The interrogation of Goron, under relentless pressure, quickly revealed the identities of the noble orchestrators behind the plot. Their attempts to seize power through assassination were thwarted, their reputations ruined. Emma of Normandy, a queen who had mastered the art of survival in a perilous world, continued to navigate the treacherous waters of English politics. Her uncanny ability to endure, coupled with unexpected strokes of luck, allowed her to remain a pivotal figure through multiple reigns, solidifying her legacy as one of the most powerful and enduring women of the medieval era. The silent arrow, meant to end her reign instead, became another tale of her remarkable resilience. Number 4. The cloaked figure at the Abbey. The late 14th century saw the Kingdom of Naples embroiled in relentless dynastic struggles, Queen Joanna I's turbulent reign had ended in tragedy, but the chaos continued, often fueled by competing claims to the Neapolitan throne from various branches of the Angevin and Durazzo. One such claimant was the formidable Margaret of Durazzo, queen consort of Charles III of Naples and Hungary. After her husband's assassination in Hungary, in 1386, Margaret returned to Naples as regent for her young son, Ladislaus. Her position was incredibly precarious. She was a woman in a man's world, ruling over a kingdom rife with civil war, and she faced powerful, relentless enemies, most notably Louis II of Anjou, who also claimed the Neapolitan throne. Margaret was a pragmatic and strong-willed leader, but her very presence as a regent for her son was a constant affront to those who believed the throne should pass to a more powerful male claimant. Her life was marked by sieges, political maneuvering, and the constant threat of betrayal. A specific, desperate plot against Queen Margaret unfolded in the early autumn of 1388. Margaret had taken temporary refuge at the monastery of Santa Chiara in Naples, a place of historical significance for the Angevin dynasty, seeking respite from the constant political pressures and the open warfare raging outside the city walls. While the monastery offered a measure of spiritual sanctuary, its walls were not entirely impenetrable, and her enemies, desperate to end her regency and destabilize the Durazzo claim, knew of her location. The plot was orchestrated by a disgruntled former captain of the Royal Guard, a man named Roberto, who had recently defected to the Anjou faction. Roberto, intimately familiar with the layout of the monastery and the Queen's daily routines, planned a direct, violent assault. He intended to infiltrate the monastery at dusk, disguised as a mendicant friar, and then gain access to the Queen's private quarters within the abbey. His weapon, a poisoned dagger, its blade coated with a swift-acting venom that would ensure a quick, silent death. The plan was for Roberto to enter the monastery with a group of genuine friars, returning from their daily rounds, blending in with the twilight procession. Once inside, he would slip away, using his knowledge of hidden passages and service corridors to reach the Queen's cloistered apartments. He would then wait for her to be alone, perhaps during her evening prayers or while she was preparing for bed, and strike. On the chosen evening, a heavy mist rolled in from the sea, shrouding Naples in a ghostly veil. Roberto, cloaked in the brown robes of a friar, his face obscured by the hood, joined the procession of monks entering the abbey gates. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and grim determination. He knew the Queen's chambers were on the upper floor. Accessible by a secluded stairway, he successfully slipped away from the main group, melting into the shadows of the cloisters. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors, his hand already on the hilt of the poisoned dagger concealed beneath his robes. He reached the foot of the private stairway leading to the Queen's apartments. He began to ascend, his footsteps muffled by the thick stone. However, as he reached the top landing, he found his path blocked not by a guard, but by an unexpected presence. A small scruffy terrier, a pet of one of the monastery's elderly nuns, had wandered onto the landing. The dog, named Bruno, was known for its playful nature and its habit of chasing after anything that moved. Bruno, startled by Roberto's silent, cloaked figure, let out a series of sharp, yelping barks, a high-pitched alarm that echoed loudly in the quiet abbey. The unexpected noise instantly caught the attention of a young novice, monk Brother Matteo, who was on duty near the Queen's chambers, preparing her evening lamp. Matteo, a naturally cautious individual, recognized the unusual intensity of Bruno's barks. They were not the usual playful yelps. He immediately suspected something was amiss and quickly peered around the corner. Matteo's eyes widened as he saw the cloaked figure clearly. Not a monk standing frozen on the landing, his hand now clutching something at his waist. Without a moment's hesitation, Matteo raised the alarm, shouting with a surprisingly strong voice, "Intruder! Guards!" Roberto, startled by the dog's barks and the novice's sudden appearance, knew his opportunity was lost. He cursed under his breath, spun around, and attempted to flee back down the stairway. But the novice's shouts had already brought the Queen's personal guard stationed nearby. Rushing to the scene, a swift pursuit ensued through the dimly lit corridors. Roberto, though agile, was quickly cornered in the monastery's herb garden. After a brief struggle, he was subdued, his poisoned dagger clattering to the ground. Queen Margaret, alerted by the commotion, emerged from her chambers, her face a mask of stern inquiry. She saw the captured assassin, the discarded dagger, and the small, yelping terrier still excitedly pawing at Brother Matteo's robes. The plot, so meticulously planned, had been foiled by the unexpected intervention of a small monastery dog and the vigilance of a young monk. Under interrogation, Roberto confessed, revealing the Anjou faction's involvement and their desperate desire to remove Margaret from power. Margaret, though shaken by the brazenness of the attack, within the supposed sanctity of the monastery, remained outwardly composed. Her life had been saved by the sharp senses of a loyal canine and the quick thinking of a dedicated novice. The attempt further solidified her resolve. Margaret of Durazzo continued her unwavering regency, guiding her son through the treacherous political riot. The cloaked figure at the abbey became another chilling footnote in her long and perilous reign. Number 3. The King's Folly and the Queen's Peril. The late 13th and early 14th centuries witnessed a dramatic period in English history, none more so than the tumultuous reign of King Edward II and the ascendancy of his French queen, Isabella, known famously as the She-Wolf of France. Isabella was a woman of intelligence, fierce determination, and ultimately ruthless ambition. Her marriage to Edward II was a disaster marked by his favoritism towards male courtiers, his neglect of his queen, and a growing political instability that threatened the crown. Isabella, initially a loyal and dutiful queen, became increasingly alienated and frustrated by her husband's misrule and the powerful favorites who controlled him, particularly Piers Gaveston and later the Despensers. By 1326, Isabella had fled England to her native France, ostensibly on a diplomatic mission, but in reality to gather support against her husband and his despised advisors. It was during this period of exile and burgeoning rebellion that a specific desperate plot against her was hatched by Edward II's remaining loyalists, particularly the Despensers, who recognized Isabella as the gravest threat to their power. They viewed her as a dangerous rebel queen, intent on overthrowing the legitimate king. The plot aimed to eliminate Isabella before she could return to England with an invasion force. The Despensers, powerful and cunning, had agents across the Channel. They sought to neutralize her with a method that would appear to be a simple, tragic accident. Their plan involved rigging a section of the road in Picardy, France, where Isabella was known to travel frequently between her various supporters and the court of her brother, King Charles IV of France. Target was a specific ancient stone bridge spanning a swift-flowing river, a structure known for its age and the deep chasm it crossed. The Despensers' agents, skilled in demolition and sabotage, were tasked with secretly weakening the bridge's keystone and supporting arches. Their goal was to cause the bridge to collapse as Isabella's carriage, heavily laden and surrounded by her retinue, passed over it. The swift current of the river below, known for its hidden rocks and treacherous eddies, would then claim her and her immediate entourage, leaving no survivors and no clear evidence of sabotage. It would be attributed to the bridge's age in the elements. In the autumn of 1326, Isabella, accompanied by her young son, the future Edward III, Roger Mortimer, was on her way to meet with a group of rebellious English nobles who had sworn to support her cause. The day was overcast with a chill wind. As her grand procession approached the ancient bridge, the air grew heavy with a sense of foreboding. The agents, disguised as local laborers, were hidden in the dense woods bordering the river, their ropes and tools at the ready, prepared to pull the final supports and collapse the weakened structure. They watched, their hearts pounding, as Isabella's carriage began to roll onto the bridge, the heavy iron-rimmed wheels groaning on the ancient stones. However, at that very moment, an unexpected and violent tremor shook the ground. It was not a natural earthquake, but a sudden, localized geological shift. A massive, ancient oak tree, its roots already weakened by years of erosion growing on the riverbank directly beside the approach to the bridge, suddenly groaned and toppled with a deafening crash. The tree fell not into the river, but directly across the road leading to the bridge, a mere 10 paces from Isabella's lead outriders. The sudden, colossal sound and the immediate obstruction caused chaos. The horses pulling Isabella's carriage reared violently, whinnying in terror. The led knights pulled back sharply, halting the entire procession just as the front wheels of Isabella's carriage were about to pass onto the bridge itself, the air filled with shouts of alarm and the clang of armor. The dispenser's agents, startled by the unexpected tree fall, hesitated. The sudden confusion had disrupted their timing. As they hesitated, the ground beneath them shifted slightly from the impact of the tree, and the already weakened bridge without any human intervention gave a groan. A sickening crack echoed across the chasm, and then with a thunderous roar, the ancient stone bridge, destabilized by the tree fall's vibrations and its own inherent weakness, began to crumble. One by one, its massive arches gave way, plummeting into the turbulent river below, sending plumes of spray high into the air. Isabella, peering out of her carriage window, watched in stunned silence as the very structure they had been moments from traversing vanished into the swirling, hungry waters. Had the tree not fallen, had the horses not reared, her carriage would have been among the first to plunge into the abyss. Plotters, witnessing the catastrophic yet unassisted collapse, realized their intended accident had occurred without their direct action, but also, crucially, without their target on it. The agents, fearing discovery in the ensuing chaos, quickly melted away into the forest, leaving no trace of their presence. Isabella, though deeply shaken by the near-death experience, was miraculously unharmed. Her life had been saved by a completely unforeseen act of nature, the timely fall of an ancient oak tree. The incident reinforced her resolve. She had defied death, and she would defy her enemies. Isabella of France would indeed return to England, lead her rebellion, and ultimately depose her husband, leaving an indelible mark on English history. Collapsed bridge, a symbol of her near demise, instead became an unwitting monument to her survival. Number 2. The Whispers in the Wall. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman of legendary beauty, intellect, and indomitable will, dominated the European political landscape for much of the 12th century. She was Queen Consort of France, and later, even more significantly, Queen Consort of England, ruling vast domains and influencing generations of monarchs. Her life was a tapestry woven with intrigue, rebellion, imprisonment, and immense power. Despite her royal status, or perhaps because of it, Eleanor faced constant threats to her life and liberty, from envious rivals, rebellious vassals, and, even at times, her own formidable husband, King Henry II. It was during one of the most tumultuous periods of her life in the years following the Great Revolt of 1173 to 1174, where she openly supported her sons against her, was conceived. After the rebellion was crushed, Eleanor was placed under strict house arrest by Henry. Effectively a royal prisoner, primarily at Winchester Castle and later at Salisbury, for over a decade. Her confinement, though seemingly secure, did not make her immune to danger. Indeed, her very existence as a powerful magic figure, even imprisoned, was a threat to those who wished to consolidate their own influence or maintain the new order. The plot hatched in the winter of 1180 by a faction of Henry II's loyalists who believed Eleanor was a constant source of sedition and a dangerous influence on her sons, aimed for a quiet, untraceable elimination. They knew Eleanor was kept in heavily guarded apartments, making a direct assault impossible. Their method was a slow, subtle exposure to a lethal agent concealed within the very fabric of her environment. Their chosen weapon was a particularly virulent strain of mold or fungus, cultivated from contaminated grain known to release toxic spores when disturbed. This particular fungus caused a debilitating lung ailment, leading to a slow, wasting death that could easily be mistaken for a natural decline. in health, especially for a prisoner in confined quarters. The agents bribed servants loyal to the plotting faction were instructed to introduce small concealed packets of this spore-laden material into the hidden crevices and ventilation shafts within Eleanor's personal chambers at Winchester Castle. The intention was that the spores would slowly release into the air, inhaled by the Queen over weeks and months, causing her eventual demise without suspicion. One bitterly cold January night, two of these bribed servants, a chambermaid named Agnes and a valet named Martin, gained access to Eleanor's private chambers while the Queen was attending a supervised evening prayer service. They worked swiftly and silently, their hearts pounding with fear and illicit excitement. They carefully inserted the small cloth-wrapped packets of the fungal material into a ventilation shaft hidden behind a tapestry and into a loose stone within the fireplace. They then retreated, believing they had set the Queen's doom in motion. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor, confined to her chambers, did indeed begin to feel unwell. She experienced a persistent cough, shortness of breath, and a dull ache in her chest. Her royal physicians, often consulted during her imprisonment, attributed it to the damp winter air and the stress of her confinement. They prescribed herbal remedies and rest. However, Eleanor, despite her weakening health, possessed an exceptionally keen intellect and an uncanny nose for trouble. She noticed a peculiar earthy odor in her chambers, a subtle mustiness that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, particularly strong near the fireplace, and a certain section of tapestry. It was unlike the usual smells of stone and old wood. She had lived in countless castles and knew their natural scents. This was alien. One afternoon, while resting near the fireplace, a small ornamental ceramic vase, placed on the mantelpiece, shifted slightly from an unnoticed tremor in the castle walls. It fell with a muffled clink, revealing a small loose stone behind it. Eleanor, always observant, noticed a tiny dark smear on the exposed mortar behind the stone. It looked like fine black dust. Her suspicion, once a vague discomfort, solidified into a chilling certainty. Something was wrong. She immediately summoned her most trusted, though closely supervised, lady-in-waiting, a woman named Marie. Whispering conspiratorially, Eleanor instructed Marie to discreetly examine the wall near the fireplace and the tapestry. "Feel for any draft, any unusual texture, any opening," she instructed, her voice low and firm. "And bring me a clean piece of white linen, and say nothing to anyone." Marie, her eyes wide with apprehension, followed the Queen's instructions. She carefully prodded the wall near the loose stone, and then, after much effort, located the subtle opening of the ventilation shaft, hidden behind the heavy tapestry. She discovered the small cloth packets partially open, emitting a faint, musty odor. As she touched the packets, a fine, dark dust, almost like soot, adhered to her fingers. She brought the evidence back to the Queen on the white linen, her face pale with dread. Eleanor, seeing the dark dust and smelling the distinctive odor, knew instantly this was no natural illness. She had been targeted. She immediately demanded new chambers, claiming the air in her current ones was stifling her breath. Her guards, assuming it was the complaints of a sickly prisoner, begrudgingly complied. The old chambers were subsequently cleaned and aired out, and the source of the fungal spores was quietly discovered and removed by Eleanor's few trusted loyalists within the staff, who, though not strong enough to rebel, were loyal enough to carry out her specific, unusual requests. The plot was foiled, its perpetrators never formally punished, but their names were known to Eleanor. Her life, though still confined, was saved by her own sharp senses and the uncanny ability to detect the subtle disturbances in her environment. Eleanor of Aquitaine, the indomitable Queen, continued her long, arduous imprisonment, surviving not only her enemies, but also the very air she breathed, a testament to her extraordiness. She would eventually outlive Henry II and play a crucial role in the reigns of her sons, Richard the Lionheart, and John, her legacy secured by her remarkable ability to defy death. Number 1. The Whispers of the Dark Queen's Bane. The early 7th century was a time of savage dynastic warfare in Francia. At the heart of this bloody conflict were two queens, bitter rivals, locked in a multi-generational feud. Fredegund of Neustria, whose dark story we have already touched upon, and her equally formidable adversary, Brunhilda of Austrasia. Brunhilda, a Visigothic princess, was renowned for her intelligence, administrative skill, and when provoked, her unyielding ruthlessness. She was a queen who ruled, not just reigned, often battling rebellious nobles, ambitious churchmen, and the constant murderous machinations of Fredegund. Brunhilda's reign was a succession of exiles, regencies, and bloody battles, and she, perhaps more than any other queen of her era, faced constant existential threats to her life. By 613 AD, Brunhilda, though aging, was still a force to be reckoned with. She had served as regent for several of her grandsons, attempting to restore order and royal authority in a fragmented kingdom. However, her iron rule had alienated many powerful Frankish nobles, who yearned for greater independence and resented her foreign origins and her attempts to centralize power. These disgruntled aristocrats, led by the ambitious mayor of the palace, Warnakar, saw her as an obstacle to their own designs and a tyrant who needed to be removed. Their plot against Brunhilda was born of desperation and a desire for absolute power. They aimed to eliminate her during a major gathering of nobles and bishops at Orleans, a strategic city in the heart of Francia. Queen was expected to make a grand public appearance, intended to assert her authority and rally support. The conspirators, knowing her personal guards would be particularly vigilant during such an event, devised a plan that relied on surprise and chaos, using a method both ancient and terrifying. Their weapon, a specialized form of Greek fire, not the naval weapon of later fame, but a precursor, a flammable mixture of resins, sulfur, and naphtha, highly volatile and difficult to extinguish, capable of creating immense chaos and destruction in a confined space. The goal was not necessarily to burn her directly to death, but to trigger a stampede, a panic rush, in which she could be trampled or suffocated amidst the fleeing crowd, her death appearing as a tragic accident in the resulting inferno. The conspirators bribed several lower-ranking palace servants and guards, individuals who had grievances against Brunhilda or were simply desperate for the promised gold. Their task was to conceal small, tightly sealed clay vessels containing the volatile mixture within the rafters and beneath the raised platforms of the grand hall where the assembly was to take place. These vessels were equipped with primitive, slow-burning wicks designed to ignite minutes after the hall was filled with people, specifically as the queen was delivering her address. Aim was to create a sudden, terrifying conflagration that would spark panic and disorder. On the appointed day, the grand hall of the Orleans royal palace was packed. Nobles, bishops, and royal officials from across Francia gathered to hear Queen Brunhilda. The air was thick with anticipation. Brunhilda, though frail with age, entered with her usual regal bearing, her eyes still sharp, her presence commanding. She ascended the dais, her elaborate robes rustling, and began her address, her voice strong and clear, outlining her vision for the kingdom. However, as she spoke, an unexpected sound, barely audible at first, began to echo from the rafters above, a series of soft, scuttling noises, followed by faint, agitated chirps and squeaks. It was a colony of bats, disturbed by some unseen disturbance, fluttering nervously within the ancient timber beams. The light from the myriad torches and oil lamps combined with the sudden commotion disoriented them. One particularly large bat, disoriented and panicked, flew directly towards the source of a small, barely flickering flame, one of the slow-burning wicks, precariously close to igniting one of the concealed Greek fire vessels. The bat, in its frantic flight, brushed directly against the exposed wick. The small, fragile flame, still not fully ignited, was instantly extinguished by the sudden air disturbance and the bat's wing. The bat then crashed into the clay vessel itself, causing it to fall from its concealed perch within the rafters. The vessel, though sealed, was not designed for a direct impact. It struck a lower beam, cracking open with a loud smash. The volatile, pungent liquid mixture, though not ignited, immediately spilled onto the wooden floorboards below, emitting a strong, acrid odor that swiftly permeated the air. A collective gasp swept through the hall. The unmistakable foul smell of the unignited Greek fire mixture filled the room, triggering immediate alarm. Brunhilda, though initially startled by the commotion in the rafters, instantly recognized the noxious scent. Her years of warfare and intrigue had familiarized her with the smell of such destructive agents. Her eyes, sharp and alert, swept across the faces of the assembled nobles. She saw the panicked faces of some, the knowing glances of others. Before panic could fully erupt, Brunhilda's quick thinking saved the day. With a voice that boomed across the silent hall, she cried out, "Seize that area! Extinguish any flame! There's a threat!" Her personal guards, long trained to react to her every command, immediately rushed to the location of the fallen vessel. The conspirators among the servants, seeing their plot unraveled, attempted to flee, but they were quickly apprehended amidst the sudden but controlled chaos. The spilled mixture was quickly contained and extinguished, and the remaining unignited vessels in the rafters were discovered and removed. Plot had been foiled, not by human intervention, but by the unexpected, almost miraculous intervention of a disoriented bat. Under intense interrogation, the captured servants confessed, revealing the full extent of the plot and the names of the powerful noble conspirators, including their Warnakar. Brunhilda, though severely shaken by the proximity of her brush with death, remained outwardly stoic. Her life had been spared by the most improbable of circumstances, the frantic flight of a tiny nocturnal creature, though she would eventually meet a brutal end years later. This particular attempt on her life, one of many, had been thwarted by sheer unpredictable fate. Brunhilda of Austrasia, the formidable queen, continued her struggle against her enemies, her reign a testament to her unyielding will, and the strange twists of destiny that so often decide who lives and who dies in the unforgiving world of medieval power.